Hi everybody, I hope you're all well today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you very much for having me. I think I've probably got one of the longest job titles, and some of you might be thinking, what does that actually mean? So if you just think of it in terms of within Rolls-Royce, I help people do their jobs in a more efficient way. I love improving the way we work, and that's essentially what my job is in civil aerospace. So I'm Jo. I'm a senior manager in Rolls-Royce, but I'm also a self-confessed people pleaser, perfectionist, and I suffer with anxiety. So I'm here today just to share a little bit about my own story and the challenges that I've faced with my own mental health. And I really wish that 22 years ago when I was at university, I'd had the fortune to sit down and have an event like this and people explain to me what some of the challenges are and what pressure means and what stress really means. And that didn't happen 22 years ago. It wasn't talked about as much. So who am I? Where am I from? So really quickly, I was born in a small village in Staffordshire called Biddulph. 25, 30 years ago, not much diversity in Biddulph, and quite quickly I realised that the only way that I was going to experience real diversity was to learn languages and go and explore the world. So languages is my first love, and I enrolled in a course in Aston University first, actually, studying both languages and international business. Within 3 months of joining, I quickly realised that it wasn't for me, so that was my first experience of perceived failure, I guess, in terms of trying something and it not quite working out. Took some time out and realised quite quickly that the international business side wasn't for me, but the languages was. So I enrolled in a course in the following year at the University of Birmingham, and as part of that degree, I was fortunate enough to go and spend time overseas and study in universities in France and Germany. So it came to the point of graduating, and I was fortunate enough to get onto the graduate training scheme at Rolls-Royce. And if somebody had said to me when I joined Rolls-Royce that in 15 years' time, Jo, you're going to suffer severe burnout, I would not have believed them, not at all. I joined the company, I've had an amazing career. Like I said, I've been fortunate enough to travel the world, grasp some really great opportunities, and I've had about 8 different roles during my time at Rolls-Royce. But it was back in August 2017 that I was heading up a team within civil aerospace, and my team was responsible for writing the contracts that we put in place with our airline customers. And I remember really vividly sitting there one day, and I'd been asked to approve a contract that somebody had written, and I remember staring at the words, and they just didn't make sense. And I'd experienced what I would say is extreme brain fog. The words just didn't mean anything at all. And it was my job to approve this contract. And that for me was a real light bulb moment in terms of I'm not very well. And it just shows that something like that can happen quite quickly, actually, unbeknown to me. However, on reflection, the symptoms were all there. And that's just what I wanted to talk to you a little bit today around what led me to that point of experiencing real burnout. The signs had been there, actually. I had been working in an environment that was high pressure, having to meet deadlines, managing teams globally, and I'd put a huge amount of pressure on myself to do that in the most perfect way possible. I was finding that it got to Sunday night, and I got a real sickness in my stomach, a real worry about having to go into work on Monday. I had lost my appetite, I was very teary, and all of these are symptoms, as we know, of stress. And I was just unable to manage that stress, and that stress had been within me for a good number of years. And nobody really had ever talked about that throughout my career. There was a huge expectation that I'd placed on myself to really progress my career and not let anybody down. And I felt that point in August 17 a real low point in terms of I had let people down. But now I realise that it was probably the bravest thing that I've ever done in terms of shouting up and saying, I'm not very well and I need some help. And this phrase here, you can do anything but not everything, has stuck with me since 2017. And it stays with me now in the way that I approach everything that I do. We can all do anything that's asked of us, but we simply can't do everything. So what happened since 2017? Well, I spent 3 months outside of Rolls-Royce. I took some time off to get myself better. I was not just physically, but also mentally very, very weak. And I genuinely found both yoga and running, so physical exercise and relaxation, to really help me in my recovery. When I was at university, I did nothing like that whatsoever. So I can't stand here and say that at university I was involved in sports. I was highly active in terms of my social life. I worked really hard, but I really didn't understand what pressure meant and what relaxation could do to help me when I was feeling stressed. And I now do in terms of practicing yoga and running. I'm a mum to 2 boys. That photo was taken a couple of years ago. They are now 8 and 9 years old. That for me has been a massive challenge in terms of managing my career and also being a mum. The fact that I am still working and standing here today, still at Rolls-Royce, is absolute testament to the way that I've been treated in the company. So I'm standing here today and I haven't been impacted by the fact that I've suffered mental health issues, that I had to take some time off. In fact, my career's grown from strength to strength as a result of that, because I've learned so much in terms of how I can manage my own stress and how I can manage that of my team. And I'm much more aware now of those symptoms, not just in myself, but in others. So again, if I was sat here 22 years ago, what would I have really appreciated in terms of some advice? This is the first one. So focus on yourself. Prioritise your own well-being. I hadn't done that up until that point in 2017. I was also very conscious that I was a mum of 2 young boys, so my family came first. My job came second, and I came third, and I need to get to the top of that priority list, and that's what I've learnt. Secondly, be yourself. When I joined Rolls-Royce, I must admit, I knew I was in a corporate environment from university, and everything from the way people dressed 22 years ago was very formal. Which wasn't me. I'd come away from university not wearing a suit at university, and I struggled a little bit having to conform. We've moved on a long way since then. People are not within Rolls-Royce walking around in suits all the time now. But certainly 22 years ago, I didn't feel like I could be myself, whether it be the way that I looked and had to dress or the way that I behaved as well. And I modelled myself on other leaders' behaviours rather than really modelling my own. And what I know now, 20 years on, is the way that I lead is with kindness, with compassion, and with real empathy. And I genuinely believe that those 3 qualities get the best out of people, and that's who I am. Thirdly, not being afraid to say no. So I spent a lot of my career saying yes. Of course I'll help you with that task. Of course I'd like to do it for a development opportunity. And I've really learned now to not say yes to everything and be much more confident in the way that I respond. It might be, well, I can't do it yet, but I can do it next month. And also recognising that it's okay to let people down sometimes, and I didn't want to do that in my early career. Asking for help's so important. So I struggled in silence on the run-up to that period of taking some time out, and if I'd asked for help much sooner, I know I would have got it, and I know things would have been much more different. And finally, these are 4 pillars which they're well-known pillars, which ultimately, if I'd adopted a bit more discipline in these 4 pillars, I know I would have been in a better place. So this is all around learning how to relax, eating well, moving, and getting good sleep. And it sounds really simple, and this takes some real discipline to do that well. And I'm not standing here today again saying that I get the right balance day in, day out. There's some mornings, for example, that I'll switch the alarm off. I love going out for a run first thing in the morning, but some mornings I just don't feel it. So I'm kind to myself in terms of not today, but tomorrow. And sometimes at night I want to eat half a packet of biscuits, and I'm kind to myself, and sometimes I'll do that, but that's not every night. And sleep. Sometimes I'll want to stay up a bit later and catch up with friends, spend time with my husband, and I'll do it. So I think it's about having that balance and not putting the pressure on myself. And the final thing, this isn't a quote from me, but I saw this on LinkedIn recently, and it really resonated, so I'll just read it out to you. Our mental health is more important than our career, our bank balance, other people's opinions, the event you said you'd attend, and your family's wishes or your friends' wishes combined. So if taking care of yourself means letting someone down, then let someone down. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Joanne. I love that quote at the end. I love it. I'm going to use it all the time. I'm going to pin it up. I'm redecorating my house at the moment, so I might actually get that framed and put it up in my bathroom. Thank you so much. That was honestly incredible. Would you mind taking any questions if people have got questions?
Yes,
has anyone got any questions for Jo? I'll give you that.
I can see 2 hands. Brilliant.
Hello.
Hi.
You have worked around 20 years. That's almost how old I am. But how does it feel you have seen a lot of people. For me, people are I find people really fascinating, and meeting people with different cultures and getting on different stories. And how does the journey feel like? Like, do you ever sit and imagine, like, the day I went into Rolls-Royce, and then do you think of the shifts that like how you have seen Rolls-Royce progress, right? So how does it feel? I just want to ask, how does it feel?
So how does it feel in comparison to how it was when I first joined?
Yes.
Yeah, very different. So there is much more openness now about who you are, and I'm really pleased that we see a lot of colleagues now open up about how they work best, what their background is, and what help they need. And that has changed from the organisation that I joined 22 years ago, absolutely.
That's cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, great question and good insight as well, isn't it? Encouraging people to be more of who they are. I think we've got another question to come.
Hi, like you said, like 20 years ago, mental health and stuff wasn't talked about so much. Do you have any advice with, like, talking to, like, older colleagues or, like, older supervisors about your mental health, or asking them for help when they're from the generation that doesn't understand as much? Do you have any advice with communicating with them?
It's a great question too. So I find for the older generation, it's not as natural to ask, how are you? And I think it's really important to help that generation understand how we are feeling. And sometimes what that means is, I need to tell you how I'm feeling right now. So you might not get asked the question directly. I find a lot of the time people will ask, oh, are you okay, Joe? And then it'll, of course I'll answer yes to that, the way it's been posed. So it does require quite a bit of courage, I think, on us to actually get out there and say, this is how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great answer, actually. I think sometimes also it's about not interpreting their lack of understanding as them not caring, because we can only sort of support someone if we've got the right information and if we've had experience in that. And I think once people are given that information and given some guidance on how they can support us specifically, then actually that they will do. So I suppose what I'm saying is them not saying anything or not necessarily asking doesn't mean they don't care. Because I think sometimes when we're in a difficult place, we can interpret it as they don't care about me, or they're not understanding, and we can then kind of have those relationships break down slightly as well. So if we can give them information and say, on my bad days, this is what would really help me, if you could do this, that, or the other, or this is what would help me, do you think you'll be able to do that, or could you try to do that? Is empowering them to be able to do that as well. Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've got another question for you, Joe.
Hi, thank you so much for the great presentation. It was really good. So I'm doing my PhD. I just started my PhD, and before joining my PhD, I actually worked at Rolls-Royce for a few years, and it's a great company. So my question is, it's like, because I was moving from industry to now gone back to education, what's your view on, like, it's a big change, like, what's your view on how to juggle with that?
So going back from...
going from industry to education now.
So is that what you're going through at the moment? You're going back into education?
Yeah, like going back to PhD.
Going back to your PhD. So any tips in terms of that transition? Is that
yeah,
what you're
in
asking?
general, yeah.
It's hard for me because I haven't done that transition myself. I think a lot of the skills that you've learned, though, are transferable from that experience in industry. So you take those into your studies again, would be my first point. And secondly, just not to be too hard on yourself in terms of it is a different environment that you'll find yourself in. And the way that you manage your workload and your energy, no doubt, is going to shift from where it was in the industry experience. So again, asking for help, if you're finding that difficult, I would hope that you'd got that in the PhD world as well. So keep asking for help, but recognise that it will be different.
Yeah, I think I say identifying that it's different is actually kind of half the battle, because sometimes we go into something in a different environment and we haven't consciously recognised it's different. So then we're like, well, why do I suddenly feel so different? Because I haven't labelled it, I haven't recognised that. I think a lot of the time with people I know who've kind of gone back into education, they sometimes find it difficult because in work they've got very tight and short deadlines. And so they feel like they're being productive because they're ticking things off. And sometimes I think in education, especially with PhD, it's obviously a longer course and a longer time before you can get that satisfaction of ticking something off. And a lot of that is self-directed in education. So I think kind of almost setting yourself goals and keeping up with that contact, that physical contact with tutors and or outcomes, if you're an outcome person, it's probably quite important to keep you motivated. Yeah, that's just from what I've
Good
observed.
Advice. Yeah, thank you.
Here's another question.
Hi, Joe. You can say no to me, but I have two questions here. The first one is, I think I'm quite strong, so I always push somebody they don't want to do. So can you please tell me how to stop pushing somebody? And the second question is, in the other side of myself, I'm always like to help with people, even they didn't ask for help. So I was like, I want to make people happy and I want to pleasure them. So how can I stop these stupid things? Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. So let me get this straight then. So the first question is, often you will push somebody to do something that you want them to do, is that right? And you're just looking for a bit of advice on how you best do that?
It's like I want them to do something to be their best of themselves, but it's not mine. So I will push them to do something. It's like, but I cannot feel when I push them at the moment.
So trying to get somebody to do something for you.
Not for me,
maybe
for
is
others.
It, so something you think that something would be good for someone else to do for themselves. You think, oh, actually, I think it'd be good for you to do that with your life, but actually they don't want to do it, and you're trying to make them do that because you think it'll make them happy. Is that right? Yeah. So you have a judgment about, you think if you did, let's say your friend next to you, you sort of say to them, I think what would make you happy is if you did this, and they're like, no, I don't think so. You're like, no, come on, do it. Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I suppose my initial reaction to that would be, well, what would make you happy? So it's asking them for their views. I've been told what I should do at lots of points throughout my career, which isn't necessarily always helpful. So I think asking for the other person's views can be really helpful. What do you need? What would you like to do? What's going to make you happy?
I think it's also interesting to ask yourself why you're doing that. Because sometimes I'm talking about myself here as well, so sometimes we have a fixer mentality. We think, oh, I want to make everyone around me who I love happy, I need to fix this, I need to fix that for them. But sometimes that's more about us than it is about the other person. So, you kind of, where are your boundaries with that? And actually, sometimes we feel like we were talking about people pleasing or trying to make sure we look after everybody, as that being our responsibility. So sometimes it comes from that place. So it's about, like Jason said, like identifying why are you doing that, and actually where are your boundaries. And as Joe said, I think in my experience, it's more useful to ask questions and for that other person to come up with their own solution rather than it is to give advice or to tell them what to do, because in my experience most of the time they just push back against that. Or at least I do.
Yeah. Thank you.
When you asked for help at Rolls-Royce, how did you go about doing that? And also that would have taken a lot of courage. So how did you talk yourself into doing it as well?
Great question again. So I at the time went to a colleague, and it was actually my colleague who said, you need to go and see the GP. So on that very day, I'd broken down in tears, the day where I was looking at that contract and it just didn't make sense. And I knew something wasn't right, so in absolute tears, and my friend had said to me, you need to just leave. So I did, and I went to see the GP. So it was the following day that I reached out to my management team and explained, I'm not well and I need to take some time out. So the support was absolutely amazing. There was no rush for me to get back into the workplace. No pressure whatsoever. It was more, what do you need from us? And if what you need is no contact from us for a month, then that's absolutely fine, Joe. And that actually helped. The workload and the pressure had got so much that I needed that distance from the organisation. So, and they afforded me that.
Yeah. So, great
Hi.
question.
Thank you.
Hi. So clearly Rolls-Royce were very supportive in that situation. Not all employers would be. I had a similar situation 15 years ago. I was signed off sick, postnatal depression, and it was actually, my baby was 1 by the time I asked for help, and it was the stress of going back to work that kind of made me realise I was poorly. I had 3-4 months off, and when I went back, nothing had changed. I get the impression from today that employers are getting a lot better. I worked for a big company, but not all companies are getting better, and smaller companies, I imagine it's a lot harder. So what advice could you give to someone who maybe ends up in a similar situation where their employer isn't as supportive? You know, what could they do?
If my direct line manager had not been as supportive, then I would have gone to HR. So you've got a number of different routes for help in any organisation. It's not necessarily just your line manager. So that would be one route. Most companies will also have an ethics line where you can go and speak to somebody impartially and ask for some advice there, or an employee assistance programme as well. But HR would have been my second port of call if I didn't feel like I was getting the support from my line manager. You're absolutely right. I'm sure that my experience is not consistent, nor the reaction I got is consistent even today. It did require a lot of courage, though, in terms of me being clear on what I wanted to ensure that I didn't get myself in that place again. So we did a lot of work within the company around, well, what kind of role would suit me better as I return to work. Putting somebody back into that role that they've left is not the right answer. Or it might be, but a conversation needs to take place, and that's a mutual agreement.
So I suppose it ties in, you know, if you've had the courage to say, I'm ill in the first place, it's then having that courage to also say, this is what I need, if you're not being asked what you
Exactly.
need. I just thought it might be useful if any of us in this room end up in a similar situation in the future. It's just a useful thing to maybe know.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Might also in that space, because it was quite a difficult space to kind of get clarity through. If you were to, as Joe said, kind of like go back with actually what you feel would help you or support you, to have that conversation with a friend or a family member or your GP, and to kind of help get their support in actually being clear about what that looks like for you. Because I think when we're in those difficult situations, our minds kind of, it's not easy for us to see actually what we do want, so getting support with that. And alongside what Jay's recommended, there's often in some companies the occupational health departments who obviously will assess in relation to your job and to your role and give specific recommendations within your company potentially, not always but sometimes. So yeah. Okay, wow. Oh, we've got another question.
Great session, thanks very much. Really good insights. I was thinking about some of the students here as well, and also in my work. You can't escape the pressure at times. It might be a deadline, there might be a dissertation submission, or you have got a... How do you deal with that, I guess, that managing that bit where the pressure is there and there is a bit of work that needs to be done, and knowing when actually I do need to push myself a bit more, but actually then knowing I've gone too far? Because it strikes me that there will always be pressurised situations in work at some point. You can't escape it totally, but I just wonder how you manage that bit where you're getting close to the edge and know when to pull back, or maybe actually I should maybe just keep going this one more time.
Thanks. It's a really great question, because you're right. The roles that I'm now undertaking in Rolls-Royce, if anything, the pressure's got even more the senior that I have become. And it's how I handle that. And it's just the way that I look at it now, in terms of I can only do so much and I can only focus on the most important. So it's one thing at a time, and it goes back to that quote around I can do anything, but I can't do everything. So if you've got a deadline looming, then that's the one thing you have to focus on. Taking breaks and managing your energy in order to get that objective over the line is really important. So, and some of that requires good planning. And so I do think good planning, good preparation, not being too hard on yourself though. And again, it goes back to shouting up. If that deadline's looming and you just know you can't achieve it, then tell somebody about it.
I think that's a really great question, isn't it? A really great answer as well. I was going to say also, I think with anything, you can sort of, all of us can sustain a certain high level of pressure for a short period, but it's when it's sustained. So like you said, kind of forward planning, you can't kind of do that as a marathon. It has to be a short sprint, and then you have to have a bit of time where things are a bit stable. Then you can have another short burst and that kind of thing. And sometimes you can't always control that, but but kind of forward planning, I think, is a really key thing, actually.
Yep.
And also recognising, that when we multitask, we make poor decisions and we make mistakes, and actually having the courage to say, in my role specifically, if people ask me to do lots of things all at once, I very much learned earlier in my career to say, no, I can't do that. I've got to focus on writing this prescription or doing this right or getting this right, because I'm not going to, not make an error. So we know that multitasking is not how our brains are actually designed to function. No. So recognising limitations, I think, of that as well.
Absolutely. We shouldn't be rewarded for multitasking either. I feel like sometimes that is the case in the work environment, that look at this person, they're amazing at multitasking, they can do it all. And that is just not reality, and it's not good for us.
Science does not back that up at all.
There we go. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, how do you deal with the feeling that you've let someone down by prioritising your mental health, or if someone tells you that you've let someone down by doing that?
Great question. So how do I deal with the feeling of having let somebody down, firstly?
If you feel like you have.
Or feeling like I've let somebody down. Yeah, great. It's really hard for me because I said at the very start, I'm a people pleaser at heart. So knowing that I've potentially let somebody down does not feel good. It goes back to that quote at the very end, though. If that means that my mental health has been preserved, then for me it's a no-brainer. So letting somebody down versus feeling mentally well, I need to feel mentally well, and I can accept now. It's an acceptance, I think, which has come with experience and maturity for me, which is the way that I handle it. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
So often that feeling comes from a place of fear of, I've let someone down, what does that mean? What will they think of me? Blah, blah, blah. And actually, I think it's a good strategy to almost say, okay, I feel like I've let that person down, but how would I feel if I hadn't have let them down, and what would the impact be on me? And which, out of that balance, which is worse?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh my gosh, well, I think that's such a useful session. So many amazing questions came out of that. Jo, thank you so much for being so open and so honest about your experience. I think it's helped everybody to just feel like they can also speak up, and thank you so much. Big round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.